would you do if the painting on your wall started to change?
I'd been gutting the old house for weeks, pulling down rotten paneling, scraping wallpaper that smelled like mildew and mothballs. Every day, I told myself it was worth it, that when I was done, this place would be mine. But the silence at night crept into me. It wasn't just quiet. It was the kind of quiet that pressed down on your chest. The kind that made you hear things that weren't there. That's probably why I stopped at the flea market that Saturday. The house needed more than lumber and paint. It needed something alive, something with history. I told myself a couple of old paintings on the walls would do the trick. The woman's stall was tucked away in a corner, half hidden behind a sagging canopy. She was small, bird-like, with a face that looked folded too many times. Her eyes caught mine, like she'd been waiting for me. "You'll want these," she said, before I'd even looked. Her voice rasped like paper rubbed together. Two paintings leaned against a crate. One was a still life, dull, flat, a bowl of fruit that had long since turned to shadow. But the other, God, the other stopped me cold. It was a landscape, rolling fields, a fringe of forest, houses dotted here and there, and above it all, a sky that looked alive, clouds shifting with a strange, burnished light. The brushwork was perfect, almost too perfect, like it didn't belong at a dusty flea market, but in a gallery under glass. Gallery under glass. "How much?" I asked, already knowing I was going to buy it. She smiled, not kindly, not cruelly, just knowingly. "Take them both. 50 for the pair." I should have haggled, should have asked where she got them. Instead, I peeled a crumpled 50 from my pocket, handed it over, and carried them home like trophies. I hung the landscape in the living room that evening, above the fireplace, where the drywall still bore streaks of plaster, even against the ruin. It glowed. Every time I passed by, I found myself pausing, staring, breathing slower. It made the house feel less empty. But that night, when I walked past it one last time before bed, I thought I noticed something strange. One of the houses in the painting had a window. I was sure it hadn't been there before. I told myself I was imagining it. I woke up early the next morning, sunlight bleeding pale through the dusty blinds. I shuffled downstairs barefoot, half asleep, craving coffee, and then I stopped at the bottom of the stairs. The painting. That house in the foreground, the one I'd noticed last night, still had its window, a square of pale yellow, as if lit from within. I leaned closer. The brush strokes were so fine I couldn't even tell how the artist had managed it. It didn't look painted. It looked real, and I could have sworn there'd been no window there when I first bought it. I stared too long. long enough for my coffee to go cold in my hand, long enough for the light outside to shift across the room. Finally, I muttered to myself, stress, too much drywall dust. That's all. I turned away. But the feeling lingered. That sensation you get when you've been watched for longer than you realized. The rest of the day I worked upstairs, ripping up old carpet, bagging it, dragging it down to the curb. By evening I was exhausted. I didn't even think about the painting until I went back into the living room. The sun had already dropped, leaving the house in shadow. That's when I saw it. Another window. In another house, farther back. Dim, but definitely there. A flicker of orange, like firelight or candlelight. And something else. A wisp of gray curling upward, barely visible against the painted sky. Smoke. From a chimney that I knew damn well hadn't been there before. I stood there for a long time, hard in my throat, telling myself I should take it down, hide it in the attic, maybe burn it. But instead I turned away, went to bed, and left it hanging on the wall, because deep down I didn't just feel fear. I felt fascination, like it was waiting to show me more. The next few days blurred together. Renovations, trips to the hardware store, endless cups of coffee. But every time I walked past that damn painting, I caught myself stopping. Just for a moment. Just long enough to check. The changes were small at first. Subtle. The smoke from the chimney one day. A second silhouette of a tree at the edge of the forest the next. A pale line that looked suspiciously like a dirt path winding through the fields. It was never dramatic. Nothing shifted while I was staring at it. It always happened between moments, like I'd blink or turn away. And when I looked back, the painting had already swallowed the change, made it permanent. I tried convincing myself I'd misremembered, that the details had always been there, hidden in the brushwork. My mind just hadn't caught them the first time. But every night before bed, I found myself standing in front of it, studying it, and every night there was something new. On the fourth night, I realized something that made my stomach knot. The houses weren't random. They weren't scattered. They were forming a village, and the village was growing. That night I dreamed about smoke, endless plumes drifting across a sky I didn't recognize. And behind the smoke, faintly, I heard voices, too far to make out words, just murmurs, almost like chanting. When I woke up, I didn't go straight to the painting. I told myself I wouldn't. I even made breakfast first, forcing down burnt toast, sipping coffee that had gone lukewarm Eventually, I caved. I walked into the living room and froze. The new detail was waiting for me, clear as day. One of the houses now had a door, and on the stoop, painted in impossible precision, was the faint silhouette of a person. At first I thought maybe it was a trick of the paint, a shadow bleeding from the doorframe, but the longer I stared, the clearer it became. The shape was unmistakable. Shoulders, a head, a figure standing on the stoop like it had been waiting for me to notice. The worst part, it wasn't faceless. The artist or whoever, whatever, had given it detail, not much, just enough. A pale blur for skin, dark hollows where the eyes should have been, and it was looking out of the painting, straight ahead, straight at me. I didn't sleep that night. Every creak of the house set my nerves on edge. I sat in bed listening to the old pipes groan, the wood settle, my breath catching at every sound. By morning, I convinced myself I'd imagined the whole thing. I stumbled downstairs, eyes heavy, body aching. But when I looked at the painting, it had changed again. The figure was gone. I stood there for a full minute, trying to decide whether that was better or worse. My brain couldn't settle on either. I told myself I should take it off the wall, just lift it down, put it in the basement, leave it there until I figured out what to do. But when I reached for it, I swear I felt heat radiating from the canvas. Not warmth, heat. Like the breath of someone standing too close. My hand hovered, trembling, but I couldn't bring myself to touch it, so I left it. That night, as I passed through the living room on my way upstairs, I froze mid-step, because the figure was back. Only now, it wasn't standing on the stoop. It was in the middle of the dirt path, closer to the foreground, closer to me. I started avoiding the living room. It felt ridiculous, my own damn house, and I couldn't walk past one wall without my pulse jumping. But every time I glanced at that painting, I swore the figure was inching forward. By the end of the week, it wasn't just on the dirt path anymore. It was halfway down it, the silhouette, sharper now, taller, its arms hanging too long at its sides. I tried telling myself I was imagining it, that the stress of renovations and isolation was bending my mind. But then, little things started happening outside the canvas. Shadows shifting at the edges of doorways when I passed. Knocks in the walls. Soft, steady, like someone rapping their knuckles from the other side. My phone buzzing at 3 a.m. with no caller ID. The line dead when I answered. One night, I woke to the sound of footsteps in the hallway. Slow, uneven, like someone dragging one foot slightly behind the other. I stumbled out of bed, to swing the hammer I'd been using on the upstairs trim. But the hallway was empty. Silent. Still. I couldn't bring myself to look at the painting until morning. And when I did, the figure was standing at the edge of the painted field, one step away from crossing out of the canvas entirely. I backed out of the room, slammed the door, and didn't go back in for the rest of the day. That night, I slept with every light in the house on, and still, I dreamed of smoke and whispers I almost understood. The next morning, I forced myself into the living room. My stomach churned as soon as my eyes landed on the painting. The figure was gone again. But the absence wasn't a relief this time, because in its place, I noticed something new. Another house had appeared. At first, I thought maybe I hadn't seen it before. Maybe it had been hiding at the edge of the forest in the background. But the lines were too sharp, the paint too fresh against the older brushwork. It hadn't always been there. And the house looked familiar. The crooked gable, the half-collapsed porch, even the way the siding sagged under the weight of years. It was my house. I stood there, staring, throat dry, trying to process it. The painting wasn't just showing some imaginary village. It was recording, recreating, pulling my world into itself, piece by piece. For hours, I couldn't move. I just stood there, watching, waiting for the next detail to shift. When I finally managed to step back, I nearly tripped over the old fruit still life leaning forgotten against the wall. The one I'd bought with it. The one I'd never bothered to hang. And in that moment, a sick thought struck me. What if that one changed too? What if I'd been too distracted to notice? I grabbed it, dragged it into the kitchen, and peeled back the cloth I'd draped over it. It was still just a bowl of fruit, but as I stared, a faint, sour smell hit me. Rot. The grapes in the painting weren't just shadows anymore. They were soft, collapsing, painted in bruised purples and browns. I dropped it, hard, the canvas thudding against the linoleum. That night, the dream came back stronger. This time, I wasn't just seeing smoke. I was standing in the middle of the painted village, and every window, every glowing window, had someone staring out at me. I woke drenched in sweat, my sheets twisted around me like a shroud. For a while I just lay there, listening to the silence of the house, too afraid to move. But the silence wasn't complete. Somewhere downstairs, faint and steady, I heard it. Tap, tap, tap. Like knuckles against glass. I thought of the dream, of all those windows, of all those faces staring out. And I realized the sound wasn't random. It was coming from the living room, from the painting. I forced myself down the stairs, every step groaning under my weight. every shadow stretching too long. My breath shook as I pushed open the door. The painting glowed faintly in the dimness. I don't know if it was a trick of moonlight or something deeper, but the canvas seemed lit from within. And in that light, yes, windows. Dozens of them now, all glowing. And in each one, a face. Not detailed, not fully painted, but human enough. Mouths, eyes, shoulders pressed close to the glass, all angled outward, watching me. The tapping came again, louder now. A few of the figures in the windows were pressing their hands against the panes. Their painted knuckles drummed as if they could break through the canvas itself. I stumbled back, heart pounding, bile rising. My hand brushed the forgotten fruit painting where it still lay on the floor. It was no longer a still life. The bowl had tipped over. The fruit spilled, blackened, crawling with something that looked far too much like flies. And the background, where there had once been shadow, was filling in with the faint outline of a figure. Tall, pale, its arms hanging long. It started with the smell. I was sitting in the kitchen, head in my hands, too wired to sleep but too exhausted to think. And then I smelled it. Wood smoke. Bitter, acrid, as if a fire had been lit somewhere inside the walls. I stumbled into the hallway, my eyes stinging. The air shimmered faintly, like heat rising from asphalt, and from the living room came a glow, faint at first, then pulsing. The painting. I crept closer. The houses in the landscape blazed with light now, every window alive with a molten yellow. The smoke drifting above the painted rooftops wasn't trapped anymore. It seemed to bleed out into the air of the room, curling past my face, clinging to my skin. And beneath it all, whispers. Dozens of them, layered, threading through each other. Too soft to understand, but close enough to feel. They seemed to echo not from the painting, but from the walls around me, from the floor beneath my feet. I spun toward the kitchen, desperate for distraction, and froze. The still life was no longer a still life. The fruit had vanished completely. In its place was my kitchen, rendered in the same impossible brushstrokes. The counter, the sink, even the mug I'd left by the stove, and in the painted doorway, a silhouette, tall, watching. I backed into the living room, heart hammering, eyes flicking between the two canvases like a cornered animal. The figure in the landscape now stood at the very edge of the path, 1 foot raised, as if about to step over. Panic jolted through me. I lunged at the painting, grabbed the frame, tried to rip it down. But it didn't move. It clung to the wall like it had been nailed there, like it was the wall, I pulled harder, muscles straining, until the room seemed to tilt, shadows bending. And in that blur, for a single heart-stopping moment, the canvas rippled like water. Behind it, I saw another image. My bedroom. And in the painted bedroom I was there, standing at the foot of my own bed, staring out, eyes locked with mine. I staggered back, the scream still raw in my throat. The image behind the canvas was gone now. The painting once again, nothing but its impossible village. But I'd seen it. I knew I'd seen it. And then the house around me began to shift. The plaster walls trembled, their color paling, the grain of painted wood bleeding into the surface like brush strokes. The air thickened with smoke until I could barely breathe. Every window in the real house, my house, glowed with the same molten light as those in the painting. The whispers rose, tangled and overlapping, threading through the walls, pouring into my ears until I thought my skull would split. Closer. Belong. Stay. I stumbled into the kitchen, searching for escape. But the second painting stopped me dead. It was no longer just an image of my kitchen. Now it was this kitchen, in real time. The mug still in my hand, the ragged look on my face. And just behind me, painted taller than I'd ever imagined, was the silhouette. Its head bent low, its face a blur of pale horror, hovering inches from my own. I spun. Nothing. The room was empty. But the painting swore otherwise. A groan rippled through the floorboards, a deep, guttural sound that made my teeth ache. I ran back into the living room, desperate, clawing at the landscape canvas with both hands, nails tearing, knuckles bleeding. And again, it rippled. The image warped. And there it was, my bedroom. My own figure standing unnaturally still, painted eyes burning into mine. But this time, it didn't vanish. The painted me lifted its hand, and so did I. I wasn't in control anymore. My arm moved without my command, mirroring the brushstroke doppelganger. My chest tightened. My breath broke into jagged gasps. Stop. The painted me smiled. The world convulsed. The room folded inward, the whispers erupting into a roar. The smell of smoke filled my lungs, choking, blinding. My vision collapsed into shifting strokes of color, streaks of sky and wood and forest. And then, silence. I opened my eyes. The air was still. The houses were around me now, solid, real. Their glowing windows staring like 1,000 unblinking eyes. The forest loomed darker than night. Smoke curled endlessly above the rooftops, I turned, and there it was, the path leading back to the village square. And hanging on the wall of a house nearby, glinting faintly in painted lamplight, was a canvas, a landscape. My house, my kitchen, my life, all trapped inside. And in the center of it, a man, me, standing forever at the edge, staring outward, waiting for someone else to look